This is Megan Grace, and I am coming to you from a very, very frigid Madison, Wisconsin. If you're here, you know what I'm talking about. But Bronwyn Simons is coming to you from Vancouver Island. And welcome to New Moon Activation in February, Bronwyn. And what's it like where you are today?
It's beautiful. We were having a rare sunny day for this time of year, and the daffodils in my yard are just about to bloom.
No.
So,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Oh, well, that is a hopeful sign, and
Yeah,
that it'll be coming this
it's
way.
coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
We've passed
Sometimes
that
it's,
midpoint of winter last
yeah,
week, right? So, yeah, we're just sliding into the vernal equinox. We're getting there.
perfect. And it's so helpful to hear that there's people sitting on different places on this really kind of tiny planet in the whole universe. But yet the differences are so different. You have daffodils, we have feet and feet of snow.
I'm so sorry.
No, but even in this little, on this little planet, there are big changes, which is a great reminder that things are always shifting, right? They're always moving. Well, we were chatting just before coming on this recording about talking about the big change that happened in with the Great Conjunction, meaning that we moved out of a cycle of being for 200 years kind of ruled by the planets and the element of Earth into now a 200-year cycle of being where the planets that are associated with the element of air and that whole element are kind of ruling or are predominant element. And what we thought would be interesting for our listeners today is talk about what that shift means and how it affects all of us on a macro level. But then on a more shorter 20-year cycle, we will experience that personally in our lives. And what is so wonderful about these conversations that we have on these new moon activation sessions is we are taking a more global or macro level view of astrology, but Bronwyn, you work with people one-on-one every day, and you drill this right down into an understanding and an interpretation and a real roadmap for people on a personal level, in a personal plane. And I didn't mention this to you, but on Friday I went with a long, long walk from a dear friend here in Madison who I didn't know this, but she has started to work with you on a one-on-one basis. And she was just talking about what an incredible change or impact, I should say, it has made on her life. So thank you on behalf of my friend. And so I just want to mention that to our listeners too, that they should reach out to you if they haven't, when the time feels right to them, because your work really, really makes a difference. So.
Thank you so much for passing on that feedback. It just warms my heart to hear that. That's why I do what I do. So
yeah, well, you do it beautifully.
Thank you.
So I have been working and studying this idea of what it means to be disenchanted with life and with the way of things, and what it means or looks like, and probably even most importantly, feels like to be enchanted. And I think there are some parallels to this idea that I've been kind of marinating on with this idea of moving out of earth into air as the elements that are predominant, as the element that's predominant. And I think it was the December new moon activation where I was just kind of describing myself as at kind of the end of that rope of wow, this is about how far I can take it when I rely on my own small self. When I rely on the brain that I have in my head, this physical body, this ego to take me where I can go. And I had this vision, I guess you could say, or more like awareness, that on the horizon was a light. And I mentioned that I think that light is always there, but well, I was not seeing it. It was pretty dim for some period of time. And I think that while this being in this state of embodied in our small bodies, being connected to Earth gives us some real solid structures and sense of identity to adhere to. It also, I think we've kind of went right up to the edge of that and maybe beyond it as a society. Or as humanity, and just in time, we are being invited into this other way of being, which I will call a re-enchantment.
It's beautiful.
And what re-enchantment, I think, is having access to a realm, and not like a place, but a realm being a state of consciousness that we can draw from to understand a bigger picture, to understand the way of things as not being so linear, not being so cause and effect, not being so dualistic in their nature, more into a spacious way of being, sort of the way air moves, if you will, versus the way Earth is. So I would love to hear from an astrological perspective how this whole idea of moving, or what if you agree that we are being invited or ushered into a time and a way of being that is going to be, that's going to help us access this aspect of ourselves, whether you want to call that divine aspect or higher consciousness, you know. And before I turn it over to you and your wisdom, let me just say that it was just about 4 years ago now that I had a pretty profound spiritual experience where I would describe it as all of the veils being ripped off momentarily. And I saw the way of things as being much more interconnected, that there was a capacity for me and all living creatures to move towards each other, to recognize our oneness, to still keep your personal sense of where you are and who you are and where you end, but there was no threat. There was no rejection of the willingness to blend and to merge and to experience all that came from that. It was an amazing few hours. I wish it would have gone on forever. But I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it had gone on forever. But the experience has never left me. It was so overwhelming that for a period of time, I needed to kind of shelve it. But just recently, within the last few months, I'm willing to engage with that experience again, and because I can taste it and I can feel it again, and I'm willing to let it. It was sort of almost threatening because it was so much when it happened, but it doesn't feel like too much anymore. So
beautiful.
So there you go.
Oh my goodness, there's so much there to delight in and to explore together. So this I hardly know where to start. There's so many threads I want to pull. You've brought so many beautiful ideas. I guess I'll start where we are right now. So as we approach this new moon, we have more planets hanging out in the sign of Aquarius than we've had all at once since the early 60s. It happens to be a moment in time when there is a lot of Aquarius in the air. In the sky, we have 7 planets in Aquarius. It's unusual. And our new moon, the moon and sun coming together, right, will be in the sign of Aquarius at the same time as a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. It's a really beautiful Aquarian new moon. And it's the first new moon in Aquarius since we had, as you mentioned, the Great Conjunction in December, which was our 2 teacher planets, Saturn and Jupiter, meeting up as they do every 20 years, but in the sign of Aquarius for the first time in 800 years. So yes, we are beginning all of these Aquarian cycles. Right now at this new moon, we're beginning a 29-day Aquarius cycle. We began in December a 20-year personal Aquarius cycle and a 200-year as a human family, a 200-year cycle of Aquarius. So it was really interesting to me listening to you talk about the aspirations that you're feeling right now, the desires, and describing how you're feeling this energy, because you used all of the Aquarius keywords, right? Interconnectedness, being able to step back and see the bigger perspective, a compassionate concern for engaging with all of humanity and the non-human realms that has been amplified in a sort of a feeling of stepping out of individual space into group space, out of the limited individual mind and body and into the group mind. These are all signatures of the sign of Aquarius. So no surprise that we're all feeling all of the Aquarius right now with so many planets. And this is why, we were talking before we came on the air, we were talking about how this is the moment to talk about the Great Conjunction. Even though that happened in December, it's not just a one-time event in the sky. It marks the beginning of these much longer cycles. So now is our first opportunity, really, since that conjunction, to feel all of the intensity and beauty of this Aquarian energy. So Aquarius is an air sign. That's why we're talking about air. Our teacher planets, Jupiter and Saturn, move through all the signs in their relationship to each other, but they spend 200 years, when they have their meetups, they meet up in signs that are of a particular element. So they go through the cycle of the 4 elements over 800 years. And as you were talking about, so we haven't had these planets in air. We haven't had that 200-year air cycle for 600 years. Okay, I know this is a lot of long periods of time, but
I don't remember it last time, so it's important to write it again.
So the point is, all of these cycles are beginning in Aquarius. Little moon cycle, 29 days. We get to practice for these bigger cycles. Personal cycle of 20 years beginning in Aquarius. 200-year societal cycle beginning in Aquarius. And the whole 800-year elemental journey of our teacher planets is starting now. It starts anytime they change elements, but we're looping into that bigger 800-year cycle. So if we go back to the last time we were all in air, we're going back 600 years. And
that's the one I don't remember.
Yeah, but this is so interesting, right, to think about it. So understanding that I practice Western astrology. This is from a Western and Eurocentric perspective. So we loop in, that's the history that I'm speaking of. Not because I think it's the best history or because it's the only history, but because that's the history that this tradition derives from. So thinking about but it will be interesting if you have, as you're listening, you have expertise on world history, you can think about these cycles because of course they affect the whole planet. But I'm thinking specifically about our own Western history and how it was about 600 years ago that this idea of the individual mind and the sovereignty of the individual sort of first came into group consciousness and into our philosophy and way of thinking about life. And it was actually literally a renaissance, right? There's so many beautiful things came in the wake of this idea. But I also feel that what you just said is true, that we have ridden that train to the terminal station. We have individualized to a point where it's not serving the human family at all anymore. And this is interesting in terms of the cycles, right? When we enter deeply into the sacred science and art of astrology, we start to move out of thinking of time as a linear, moving from point A to point B, sort of evolutionary graph that's always going upward on a single line. And we start to move into this idea that I think is actually much more natural to us, of thinking of time as circular, as cyclical. And we can see it in our own lives, how we go back over the same path again and again with small incremental changes. It's more like a spiral path, right? Because there is kind of an evolutionary curve to it. But we repeat and we repeat. And it's the same thing for our human family. We go through these cycles and we repeat and we repeat. So it's not like this evolutionary trajectory and Earth is bad and air is good. It's that we have the chance, again, we've worked through, like you were talking about, finding the divine in our lives and contacting enchantment and spirit within ourselves. This is possible in each of the elements, right? We can re-enchant through earth, through fire, through water. But the beauty of these ideas as developmental cycles is that once we complete one cycle, we're so ready for the next. So as we complete this earth cycle, it's natural for us to feel like my next step is to find my sacredness, or find my divinity in my connection, my sort of ethereal connection with the rest of the human family and with the universe and with that larger expanding out of my body and into the cosmos and seeing the big picture and feeling that interconnectedness and kind of luxuriating in that access to the other world that our heart and mind and spirit can bring us to. And because as we moved through that earth cycle, we learned everything we needed to learn about staying grounded, we're ready for that next step. Not that it's a higher step, but that it's the next step as we cycle through the elements. So we enter this air period, we're thinking about touching the sacred through our minds, through interconnectedness, through ideas and philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think—
Can I add another idea to that?
Please.
This morning I was reading excerpts from a talk that Thich Nhat Hanh did in 1993. And he talked about the idea that it's possible the next Buddha will be a Sangha, which means community or a gathering of people, that the way that we will become awakened is by being— this is now my adding on to Thich Nhat Hanh's idea, but is that it is by coming together in community, the interweaving of our ideas, our minds, our potentials as individual human beings, by bringing them together, that will be the source of the next awakening.
It's such a beautiful—
pretty airy to me, doesn't it sound that
totally
way?
It's a beautiful metaphor for this next step on the journey, right? Out of a hierarchical structure where there's leaders and disciples, and into merging of minds, which, lest we glorify that too much, remember that as we step into each of the elements, like think about back when we stepped into earth, where we're thinking about in terms of our own lives, a cycle of 20 years or a cycle of 200, 800 years for our society. There were so many beautiful things that came out of us working deeply with earth, including a lot of return to earth-based religion and to, the environmental movement and the there's just so many things that we gained from that connection with Earth. But also, there's the idea of resource extraction that was the using of Earth. And there's always, the point that I'm trying to make is there's a light and shadow to each of the uses of these elements. And I think that this is one of the things for each of us to think about taking individual responsibility for as we enter into this period of air, because as we move out, to follow that metaphor, as we move out of a time where there might be more of a hierarchical structure to our spiritual practices and into a time where it's more communal, even in an ethereal sense, right? Personal responsibility becomes even more important. And I feel like we're seeing this in the world already. Not that our personal responsibility isn't always important, but in this time where we're all blooming into new philosophies and new ideas and stepping into what feels like a rich expansion of our minds and our spirituality, it's important, I believe, it's important to remember the lessons of Earth that ground us. And I think at first also we may underestimate the power of our own minds and our own spirits. And it may take us a little while to learn where the guardrails are and to learn how to take responsibility on that level. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree a lot. And what I think what we might be starting to realize is that actually our thoughts precede our experiences and our reality. And that is going to become more and more apparent to people, that it isn't so much our striving and our actions that are creating differences in our outside external world, as much as it is our thoughts and and especially the collection of thoughts we have that we call beliefs. They're really, really powerful in kind of controlling, or they really put the guardrails on what does and doesn't happen in our personal and collective lives.
Very much so. And I think one of the major themes for us as a society and personally for 2021 is examining those belief systems and their impact in our lives and getting uncomfortable, right? Letting ourselves get uncomfortable in our own, so that we can grow in our own examination of ourselves and our impact. And, you know, as you were talking about that realization of the importance of individual thought, what came to my mind was when we were little kids in the 60s, people still used to burn trash in barrels in their backyards.
Okay.
So you think about doing that now, but really there wasn't an awareness. And then suddenly there started to be this awareness in the mid 60s that, oh, there's such a thing as air pollution. Remember, that's what we called it. And I know I'm dating us. We're both past our Chiron returns. It's okay. We're in our wisdom years. It's like that. And that consciousness that is almost, I mean, we're laughing. It's like unimaginable that you would go and like burn a tire in your backyard. Like, obviously you're not going to, but there was a thought that if you did that, it didn't matter. It was just for you in your one little area. It didn't affect anybody else. And this is exactly the same thing, that we create this pollution in our own brains. We have vengeful thoughts or angry thoughts or, you name it. And it's not so much about self-censoring, it's about being aware of, I mean, this has been part of my own personal spiritual practice for a really long time. So I'm accustomed to thinking about this. It's not so much that I censor my thoughts, because that doesn't do any good. You're just suppressing what's there. It's that I work really hard to cultivate. And it's not just about having positive thoughts either. It's about an awareness of that inner climate. Just like I watch what I eat, I watch what I consume, I observe what I think, and I honor the fact that the ideas that I consume and the ideas that come out, and the ideas that knock around in there, and that, you know, in the little barrel in my own backyard, do have a tangible effect on others. I've been working with this idea for a long time, and I think for many of us, we're just starting to work on this idea.
My favorite yoga sutra is when you're suffering or not of right, which includes not being of right thought, sit down and work on the antidote. And the antidote is always the opposite. So it doesn't mean that that negative thought, you know, doesn't stay there in your mind, because it's there.
Yeah.
But by cultivating the opposite, so if you're having thoughts of hatred, cultivate, you know, thoughts of compassion or of loving kindness. And, you know, it starts out sometimes as pretty artificial, even and forced. I'll speak for myself. But if I stay with it in some form of disciplined way, I catch myself actually letting those thoughts enter into my psyche in a more natural way. And it's sort of like you're just starting to change the recipe of, you know, what your thoughts are comprised of but you have to be intentional about inviting or interrupting that negative thought, at least with these thoughts that are of a higher mind, a higher consciousness. And that's what the re-enchanting experience starts to feel like, is, oh my gosh, I'm re-enchanted with what it means to be this individual, because I'm actually starting to see that, you know, while my thoughts are important, they are, I don't want to say within my control, but they are these powerful things that I can guide to create a better reality for myself, and might I even say, more importantly, for all of us together.
Yeah.
That's how you know if a thought is a pure thought, if you give it kind of this litmus test of, does it lead to a positive outcome or experience for more than just me? If it's only good for me and something detrimental to it for everybody in my immediate circle or beyond that circle, then I need to look at it a little bit more before I act on it.
Yeah, say that again for the people in the back. This is really important. And this is what makes the difference between sort of the spiritual bypassing of, like, just think positive thoughts.
Exactly.
And really doing the hard work of training your consciousness towards compassion. Because the two are not the same thing, although they can subtly on the outside sound like the same thing. We're not talking about just think a positive thought if you feel something bad. I mean, sort of, yes, but no, it's training the mind to practice compassion. And it means that we are doing that hard work of coming up against our internal dialogues that are hard to face because they bring shame or they've been unexamined. This is you know, the anti-racism work that many of us have been engaged with recently requires this kind of work. It's not just about thinking good thoughts now. It's about really wholeheartedly examining our thought and belief structures and not doing the spiritual bypassing and engaging with what's difficult and what's shameful and what's hard, but doing that hard work of gradually over time. I mean, this is brilliant what you're saying about treating it like we treat any external bad habit, where rather than trying to fight hard against the bad habit, like if I'm eating too much popcorn at night, you fill the refrigerator with grapes and grab a bowl of grapes, and maybe I'm eating grapes and popcorn, but the hope is that eventually you'll be eating more grapes and less popcorn.
One piece of popcorn.
Right.
One piece of popcorn.
Just kind of, you know, it's the same thing, and it's much harder work to do that with our because it isn't just our negative thoughts, it's our destructive belief patterns that we don't even want to admit that we have.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
that's
I
what
don't
this
even think
time is
we
all
know we
about.
have them. Yeah,
And
right.
there's that too.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is what this time is all about. And this is where, I mean, compassion is what makes the difference between this being some sort of new agey exercise in manifestation, quote unquote, or being a truly compassionate self-examination that leads to a better world.
Mhm. For me, and it goes back to this idea of becoming re-enchanted. It's if
Mhm.
I just think I can think it, myself into a higher version of myself,
Yeah.
I'm constricted by only all that I have been and what is in my awareness right now.
Yeah.
But if I believe, which I wholeheartedly do, that I have a realm or a access to a consciousness within
Yeah.
me that is not of me but flows into me, or maybe it is always been of me but it's hidden down there sometimes
Mhm.
by the layers of life and habitual ways of being me. So it feels like we are entering into an era where people are really willing, and I think COVID and the whole exposure of the racism, for example,
Mhm.
that's always been there, is really, really charging people up to say, man, I am not just going to sit in my small, disenchanted, kind of
Yeah.
embodied way where I'm just thinking about my own needs,
Yeah.
because it's suffering with a capital S,
Yeah.
but there is this sacred with a capital S also part of me that, and it's a resource and we just haven't been relying on it enough.
Yeah.
Well, I'll speak for myself that, but it feels like we're being ushered into a time where that's going to feel like it's
Mhm.
flowing through us in a much easier way.
We
Perhaps.
are. We
Yeah.
are. And I love this idea of reenchantment. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about the idea of being reenchanted by our part in the human family and being a member of the human family.
Mm-hmm.
And I was imagining how it's going to feel when the pandemic is over and we can be together in
Yeah.
groups again.
Mm-hmm.
How we will all be experiencing a reenchantment with the power of our social lives and being together in
Mm-hmm.
groups,
Mm-hmm.
because this is something that we have taken for granted for our entire lives, that we can be together like this safely. And
Mm-hmm.
now none of us are going to be able to go back to thinking that way. This will always be something that I feel grateful for, being
Yeah.
able to come together in groups. And that's a profound kind of reenchantment with what we experience from coming together. And I love that we are finding ways to do that. I love the human ingenuity of finding ways to be together, even in this really difficult time when we're deprived of energetic, like just the energy that you get from, I'm a complete introvert and I miss it. Energy of being
Yeah.
in a group.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I
I'm
think
touched
the
by the
words you
ingenuity that we
said,
have.
we took it for
Yeah.
granted, and I think we didn't realize how mobilized, how tuned in we got to our own individual power and resourcefulness
Yeah.
just by being with other people who
Yes.
are desiring to find that place too. So
Yes.
it is about being in intentional community, which is,
Yeah.
maybe you find it at the bowling alley, after you're 6 beers in, probably not. So finding the intentional community where you are sharing literally air
Yeah.
with other people who have this same
Yeah.
desire.
Yeah.
It's gonna be so
It's
wonderful.
going to be so wonderful. And
Yeah,
we'll never take it, hopefully never take it for granted again.
yeah. So
And
tell
this
us
is,
about the
yeah,
next 29 days, or, the
yes.
new moon is on Wednesday, the
The
10th,
new
right?
moon is on, let me give you the exact time because we, as you guys know from hanging out with me a little bit, we want to get the timing exact for our new moon rituals. So we're doing it after the moon does become new. So the new moon is at 20, I believe it's 23 degrees Aquarius. And it's Thursday, so
Oh,
my time. So you're right. For you, because it's a little after. Oh no, this is okay. All right, I'll tell you exactly what it is. 12:05 p.m. Thursday, February 11th. That is Pacific time. So for you guys, it'll be about 2 in the afternoon on Thursday,
okay.
um, at
Oh,
23 degrees Aquarius. So if you have gotten a little bit familiar with your chart, you can find out where Aquarius is in your chart, and what house it's in. And then you will know what area of your life. This is really important for the whole year, um, and the whole next 20 years, right? Because the Aquarius area of your chart is where you are feeling and living into these ideas that we've been talking about this whole time.
okay.
So, obviously, I would love it if you would come and talk to me and I'll help you interpret your chart and find out where that is. But this is a simple piece of astrology that people can do for themselves if they download their chart. And then I have a free download for folks that goes through each of the 10 houses and gives some keywords. So you can figure out, oh, this moon is happening in my 10th house. So it's going to be about my career. My first house is going to be about my identity. And maybe we can drop a link for that.
Yes.
And there's actually some new moon journaling in there too. It's a nice little PDF that gives you lots of stuff to look at for the new moon. So 23 degrees Aquarius. So there's a lot of planets in Aquarius at this new moon, as we mentioned. We also have another unusual and really, really helpful planetary signature that day. It's happening around the same time as the new moon, which is the coming together of our two benefics, Jupiter and Venus. That's the ancient term for these planets that bring the good stuff into our lives, right? Jupiter allows us to expand and brings wisdom. We've been talking about Jupiterian things today. Venus is our love and money, yes, but also our deep sense of the beauty of the world and how we find balance and the balance of nature. So every year and a half or so, Venus and Jupiter meet up in the sky. And again, this is initiating a new cycle for you around abundance. And this can be abundance of wisdom. It doesn't, in fact, in Aquarius, it really is much more about the things of air that we've been talking about, which can translate into physical abundance. But this is what we're talking about, is the beginning of a richness and beauty and expansion of compassion for the human family. And it's an exceptional new moon with all of these planets in Aquarius, with the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, with Saturn and Jupiter both in Aquarius at this time. Is just exceptional. So take some time this week to spend some time with your aspirations for, you can think about the next 29 days. You can think about the next 20 years and what ideally you would like to create with your life to serve the collective, not in a way, so in a way that serves yourself as you serve the collective. So service, not servitude, right?
Say a little more about that, Bronwyn.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, for instance, when I work with people who have a lot of Virgo in their charts.
Uh-oh.
Virgos are here to be of service. So when I'm talking to big Virgo signatures, we are talking about service versus servitude, and how true service is something that fills you up because you are being authentic, you are giving from your truest gifts. And we all know that when you give from your truest gifts, that is what rewards you and fills you up and brings the good things into your life.
Mm-hmm.
So Aquarius is another one of those signs like Virgo that's very service oriented. It's a different kind of service than Virgo service, but it's that compassionate service to the collective. And as we expand into this month and into this next 20 years, like I was saying, it is that opportunity to think about how by being ourselves, how are we being of service to the human family?
I love that.
Yeah. That's the Leo Aquarius question, right? Any places in your chart where you have, those are the two signs that are across from each other that we're thinking about at this time of year because we're in Aquarius season. Aquarius is across from Leo. Whenever a sign is across from another sign, it gives us the opportunity, those axes give us the opportunity to synthesize things within ourselves. Leo Aquarius is about synthesizing that idea of self versus the group. And the beautiful Leo individual expansiveness and the courageous, warm heart of Leo, and how that plays with the service to humanity of Aquarius. And when they play together, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about you being your vibrant, warm, authentic self, and how that is, when we're being true to it, expressive of our greatest service to the human family.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the places to look in the chart. But even if you don't have your chart, you're not that far along in your astrology journey, it's all good. You know yourself and you know those parts. You know what warms your heart and where you like to show up being authentically yourself. And now is the time to think about how you serve by being yourself. That's how it's supposed to work. Service doesn't need to be servitude or sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
The highest service is not servitude and sacrifice. The highest service is our true self, expressing our gifts in the world and sharing them.
I think of servitude as being something you do out of guilt or fear. Like, well, if I don't do this, maybe I'm in a, my afterlife is not going to be so hot. That is an aspect of yoga with the whole idea around karma and why you do selfless service that I think is largely misunderstood by what ancient yogis meant by that, because what really is meant by selfless service is this idea of framing everything you do inside this idea of where it can be okay for me, but it needs to rise to the level of also being good for all of humanity, or by the very least, not detrimental.
Not detrimental.
Oh, it's just, I love it when all of this stuff comes together.
It's beautiful, right? It's really beautiful. So those are the reflections that I encourage people to engage with this new moon. It's really a great opportunity to think about what you want to create in the next 20 years, not in a like high pressure goal setting way, but in a dream your biggest dream about the world that you want to create and the role that you want to play in that world.
Yeah. So taking off the, what I want to call the guardrails a little bit, and living so much by the way you've been, or the way you think society or your past structures, whether those be your family or the groups that you associate with, not thinking so much about what they have said to you about or what you've interpreted from them as being the way you're supposed to show up, but getting a little bit outside of that a little bit, taking the guardrails off, sounds like. Which that's like liberation. That's freedom of the highest sense.
That's truly is liberation.
Yeah.
This is good information for every new moon, and for I really try to make this engagement with the lunar cycle simple, something you can incorporate into your daily life, but there are little pieces that are important to know. So this beautiful flow from the old moon to the new, the phase that we're in right now, as you're listening, probably if you're listening before the new moon, is called the Balsamic Phase. The last 29-day cycle is fading away. If we could see the moon in the sky, which we can't because she's too close to the sun, but if we could see her, we would see that diminishing crescent become just a little sliver and then die away into darkness. That is the last cycle moving out. And the moment of the new moon is that dark moment when the moon is exactly in the same place in the sky as the sun. Literally, if you were able to see them, you would see them together. That's what eclipses are and why they can only happen at the new moon. Then we can see the two of them together. But they always are together on the new moon. And then the whole cycle begins again. So it is a moment in time when it perfects, but there's slow fading of the old cycle. There's the moment when that perfects and the moon and sun are together, and then the slow beginning of the new cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to do in those 3 days leading up to the new moon is to be thinking about what we want to release and to be thinking about cleansing and purification and what we want to let go of. And it's a time of rest and introspection.
Bronwyn, can I interrupt you just because what you just said sounds like what we're supposed to do on a full moon. No?
Okay.
So explain that.
Okay,
so
I will talk us briefly through the whole lunar cycle, and this is the place to start with the balsamic moon that happens right before the new. It is there, and I will come back to the full moon because we think about different kinds of release, but this really is the end of the cycle.
Okay.
The balsamic moon is the end of the 29-day cycle. We're 2 weeks out from the full moon. Full moon was 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So think of the lunar cycle not as a series of events or marks on the page, but think of it as a flow. So once the moon becomes full, between full and new, she's releasing her light. So that is the releasing half of the cycle, you're right. But that release completes itself at the balsamic phase.
Okay.
So we start letting go at the full moon, but that's not really the focus of the full moon. We get to our full release at the balsamic at the end of the cycle. And that's what we're doing now. So 3 days of introspection, release, preparing for renewal. That word balsamic, it is like the vinegar. And here's why. It's this alchemical process of distilling and evaporating things down to their very essence. This is how the beautiful aged balsamic vinegar that we put on our salad is made. Mm-hmm. And this is the activity that we engage in at the balsamic moon. We want to let everything distill and evaporate off that isn't essential. Whatever lessons we learned in the last 29 days, whatever experiences that we had, we want to just let everything go except the essence of the lesson that we learned this month. And we carry that little balsamic essence with us over to the new moon. So in simple terms, what does that mean? It means we spend the 3 days of the balsamic moon touching on those ideas, like how has the last month been for me? What do I really want to let go of? And what was the gift that I want to carry forward? Mm-hmm. And then why I tell you the exact moment of the new moon is because you don't want to sit and bring your wishes and your intentions for what's new into that moment of release and endings, just when the light is going out. That's not the energy we want to bring to our intentions. We want to bring the increasing light to our intentions. So we wait till that exact moment. Of course, you don't have to do it at that exact moment. You can do it if you want to on that exact moment or any time in the 3 days after it.
Okay.
So anytime in the 3 days after the new moon is perfect is a good time for you to do your intentions. You're setting your wishes out into the world. So it's an inhale, exhale process, the lunar cycle. At the new moon, we begin to inhale, right?
Yeah.
And When we've completely filled our lungs, that's the full moon.
Okay.
So then we begin to release, but we have that whole releasing breath. And the balsamic is when we get to the bottom of the breath and pause.
Thank you
So
for putting that in yoga language. It
yeah,
just landed
yeah,
completely for me.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yes, we do begin the release at the full moon, but it's like that moment when we have full lungs and we begin the exhale. But the kind of release we want to do right after the full moon is like, think about, oh, I'm having a book release, or I'm releasing this out into the world. We
Okay.
are letting go of the things that we've created and celebrating them. So the full moon is a time of fruition and celebration. We've completed something. And then in that first part of the releasing cycle, we want to put it out into the world and share it. And then as the breath recedes into emptiness, that's our time for introspection. And
Mm,
you know how hard it is to sit at the bottom of a breath, right?
yeah.
That's the balsamic moon. And then we can't start, like what happened, you can't start the inhale before you've completed the exhale. That's what I'm talking about with just waiting for the bottom of the breath. That's the bottom of the wave. And then anytime really during that first, what we call the waxing phase, right? The 2 weeks between new and full, the in breath. It's a good time to put stuff out into the world, to set intentions, to make wishes. And any time on the exhale is a good time to let go.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That is so clarifying for
Good,
me. And I'm
yay.
sure it will be for other people too. And, always, always we hear or come back to this idea of everything happening in a cycle.
Yeah.
One breath, one lunar phase, one life.
You get to do it again and again.
Yep,
You get as many tries as you need to keep
yeah.
breathing, keep moving through the lunar phases. And, for many of us, our belief system allows many lives. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it seems like each time we approach a new moon, what I'm hearing you say is that then we have the influence of different visitors in our lives, meaning these different planets
Yes,
that are saying, well, I'm in a flavor this new moon with
exactly.
this,
Exactly.
and with Aquarius, just to kind of wrap this up now, this new moon, we're being invited to have it be flavored by Aquarius and just sum up and so then I get also it depends how exactly that is going to flavor my life will be different because I'm a Virgo versus yours
Yeah,
because you're
exactly.
a Taurus and so forth. Okay.
Yeah. And
So
this moon is so Aquarius. It's like Aquarius with Aquarius sauce and a side of Aquarius. Like often you have many different influences on the moon, but this is like a lot of Aquarius.
I love that with a side of Aquarius. Oh, Bronwyn, this was awesome as usual. I can't wait to get home and get this up on YouTube.
Yay.
We'll put the links in there too so that
Yeah.
people have access to that PDF you were referring.
Yeah, it's just sign up to my mailing list and I'll send you that. It has full moon journaling. There's actually a lot in there. There's the houses, there's a breakdown of the lunar cycles like we just went through.
Okay.
And then the current lunation, journaling for the current lunation. So it's a really nice little thing to have. You can print it out and do some of the new moon journaling alongside all of us. And link for the consultations. I have just opened up March consultations.
Okay.
So that's great. I'm enjoying meeting so many of you from Madison. Yeah, I guess you're listening to this and enjoying it because I'm seeing more and more of your faces, and I just love that. I did live in Madison for a few years. I went to UW for a few years, so it's just it feels like a homecoming. It's always fun to meet with you guys. And thank you so much. This is always a highlight of my month. It's just so great to talk with you.
Good. Well, it is mine too. So thank you on behalf of everyone who gets to benefit from your wisdom and your guidance and for bringing all of this mystery home in a way that we can use it to lead our lives. So
thank you so much, Megan. We'll see you next
we'll
month.
see you next month. Bye.
Okay, bye.